Hey guys, how's it going? Kevin Cleary here with a knife video for you. Today we are looking at a Civivi. This is the Civivi Sikoke. It's been around for a little while, but these can be a little hard to get your hands on, and I know I definitely had a bit of a tough time. So I've finally been able to get a hold of one, and I wanted to share it with you because this is one of those knives where the hype is actually real. This is a Ray Laconico design. Look, Ray Laconico is so prolific, and he's been around for a long, long time. Way back when I was first getting into knives, 2012, 2011, something like that. There were some Ray Laconico designs, I think from Kaiser back then. And since that time, he has worked with a lot of different companies. He's produced so many different designs. Now, they all have this sort of similar clean aesthetic. And I have to say, it really appeals to me, and that's one of the reasons I've reviewed so many of his knives. He does have his own company, and you may want to pick up something from him. I know I've had a couple here on the channel and been very, very impressed. And so, he sort of does. He does the designs, gets an OEM to make the knife, and then sells them. But anyway, I say all that to say, look, over the years, I have been and remain a fan of Laconico's work. And the only real question when it comes to a Laconico design is the implementation. There have been very few of his designs that I could say I didn't really enjoy. It just becomes a question of whether or not the company who he's designed the knife for, in this case Civivi, did a good job or not on building the thing. And guess what, guys? In this case, Civivi has done a phenomenal job. And so we have this beautiful design, extremely well put together, so enjoyable, so fidget friendly, so comfortable in hand that this just becomes, it goes immediately on, the short list of the very best budget knives you can get, the very best things Civivi has done. And this knife has done that. Like, I can't tell you how many knife reviewers I've watched, their best budget knives of whatever, the best knives you can buy for the money, all that kind of stuff. And this knife is on the list consistently, and it deserves to be there. It really, really is good. I do have a couple of minor complaints about this, so let's go ahead and get into the overall review. Starting off with size and weight, which we always do, just so you guys know, most people have some strong preferences around this. So this kind of lets you right up front decide whether this is a knife for you or not. So it's 7 5/8 inches overall. So that's a little on the small side for me. I tend to like knives that are like 8 inches or above, but nonetheless, here we are. Actually, no, let's do it this way. 3 5/16 on the blade length. So that's a little over 3 1/4. All right. Again, for me, that's a little smaller than what I like to see. Now, of course, that does mean that it's going to be a little smaller when closed. So this guy is only 4 3/8 closed, which is very, very comfortable. I do have to add one important note here, which is very, very critical. And that is, despite its smallish size, this has 3 7/8 inches of grip area. That's more than a lot of knives that I've reviewed that are like 8, 9 inches long. They rarely get close to 4 inches of grip area, and yet this has lots and lots of real estate. So really, really a great knife for those of us with larger hands, and still who still want to carry something smaller. I have larger hands. I generally carry larger knives, so this is not as much of a concern for me. But if you're a guy with larger hands and you prefer those closer to 3-inch blades, this is probably one of the most perfect knives that you could get. There are a few others out there that do a good job of this, but this is certainly on the short list. Just another reason why it's so impressive. 3.8 ounces on this, which is completely fine. The internal milling is substantial in here. I don't think you'll be able to see it. Do I have a light with me? I don't. Yeah, I do. Right up here. Let's see. So there you go. You can see the milling in there is pretty substantial, but because of that full backspacer, you get a little extra weight, and that accounts for the 3.8 ounces despite the fairly small size of this. It does feel very, very solid in hand. I have to, I know I'm getting ahead of myself and commenting on ergonomics, but that's, we kind of been talking about the real estate already. So um, now, having said all of that, that does bring us to the blade, and the blade is very good. Okay, there's lots of stuff I like about this blade. 14C28N steel is fantastic, takes an edge very well, holds it really well, has a good level of toughness and corrosion resistance. All that stuff is fantastic. However, they did put a bead blast on this, which to me is pretty disappointing. It's definitely a way of cutting cost a little bit, but I mean, there's lots of Civivis out there that have a nice satin finish that come in even cheaper than this. So I feel like it's not necessary. Nonetheless, that's what they've done, and it does. I do feel like this is such a gorgeous knife. I'm gonna give you the like. Look at this. This is a beautiful design. So well done. Um, and so then to make this decision, which sort of just tones it down, makes it feel a little bit cheaper, um, it's kind of disappointing to me. More disappointing, I would say, than on a knife that I don't have very high expectations for anyway, or I don't love as much as I love this one. So the bead blasting is a little disappointing. Having gotten that part out of the way, everything else about this blade is great. It cuts really well. It holds an edge really well. It's nice and thin. It slices like crazy. And for an EDC knife, by the way, this is fine. It's under 1/8 of an inch, which usually I don't love. But again, that kind of goes with the smallish dimensions on this. By the way, Civivi, if you're listening, if you would do an XL version of this knife, oh my goodness, it would be a dream come true. I can only imagine. Like, this handle is already nicely contoured and comfortable. If it were just a little bit bigger, it would feel so perfect in hand. It would feel, this feels very comfortable. It's just not that hand filling. So I can imagine what it would be like if it were a little more hand filling. It would just be phenomenal. Um, I know I'm getting ahead of myself, but we've kind of, I think most of us are familiar with 14C28N steel. We know it's a great steel. We know the performance is going to be good on this, and it really, really is. All right, let's move on then to the action. So we've got a liner lock, nice accessible liner with a little bit of jimping there that you can see. That does make a difference. And by the way, again, I love the way they've done this. So we've got nicely nested liners, and the only point that the liner lock is accessible is there where you actually need to be able to get a hold of it. The rest of it is hidden. In terms of detent and smoothness on this, yeah, this is really good. It'll definitely drop shut. And I ordered this a couple weeks ago, but I just haven't needed to do it since. You could actually toy with this and get it a little smoother. Front flipper works great. I'm not a big front flipper guy, but this is just so intuitive and so comfortable that it actually works quite well. So no complaints. I usually use the thumb studs. That's my preferred deployment method. In general, over a front flipper, I'm going to prefer the thumb studs, and they work great as well. And that's notable, okay? Why am I making a note of that? Well, because oftentimes to get a front flipper to work well, you have to dial back the detent, and it ends up being too weak for other deployment methods like a reverse flick or a flipper or a thumb stud. In this case, they have gotten it so perfect. It's soft enough, and of course this little extra elevation gives me more leverage, which makes it, so they've really designed this well to deploy nicely. Okay, the good detent that really makes this pop when I'm not on camera and not working with my left hand. So it works really well that way. To keep it that stiff, they've extended, this front flipper just a little, and it gives you that leverage that you want to really pop that out. So excellent job on the geometry of the front flipper and on the detent in general. Okay, I could probably live with this knife having only a thumb stud, but the front flipper, it doesn't take away anything from the knife. And so, in this case, although I rarely say this, I kind of like the front flipper. Finally, let's talk about the handle. This one happens to be G10. This is also available in a micarta handle. Both of them are very attractive, you've got these nice lines, you've got 3D machining, comfortable in hand, grippy, nice traction. Man, again, I feel like I'm just, singing the praises of this knife, and it's really really impressive. That's why I've most Civivis I like I'm used to, Civivi, you pretty much know you're going to get a good action, you're going to get pretty good fit and finish. This one has added a couple of little extras that really go above and beyond. The 3D contouring on the handle, the availability of the micarta, the nicely thought out deployment method, even the blade steel, the beautiful design from Laconico, like all of these things really elevate this knife above most Civivis. And again, that brings me back to my disappointment with the bead blasted blade. I wish they had done something a little nicer in that department, because everything else has really been sort of cranked up a notch. And so it's a little disappointing to see that the blade didn't sort of share that same feature. Okay. Finally, I've talked about ergonomics already. Very comfortable knife in hand. As we're talking about the handle, I've already mentioned the backspacer. We've also got a lanyard hole here. And then finally, take a look at this deep carry clip. We have screws that are flush with the clip and a nicely recessed spot for that clip. Now they don't, oh yeah, they do it over here on the left side. I don't know why I was thinking that, oh, I'm thinking of a different knife. There's no option to move the clip over on the Kaiser that I'm reviewing next. So I kind of had a little brain fart there. But here, there is the option to move it. I know some people don't like that. And I feel like I actually had some complaints about this in my first impressions video. That could be a different knife, though. This really puts some people off. I don't know. Here are my feelings on it, guys. It doesn't ruin the knife for me, but I would rather not see this, because the fact is, just having the ability to move the clip over here doesn't really make this a lefty friendly knife. The lock bar is still on the wrong side, and you're not fixing that. So I don't know. I guess, whatever small percentage of extra sales they're going to get by having that ability is great. And I know there are also right-handed people who, on their right hand, they have their firearm or they have something else in that pocket, so they like to carry on the left side. So I guess I like having the option, but if it damages the design, I think skip it. All right. That is, skip this little recess spot and the holes for moving this over. Or you could have left this clean and just, when you flipped it over, it wouldn't be quite as well finished if you did that. Nonetheless, it doesn't really, I'm not going to add or take away points. It just is what it is. I don't care. It doesn't bother me, but it may bother some people watching. So at least I've pointed it out, so you're aware of it ahead of time. Let me now, we've covered really everything. And look, I'm really, really impressed with this knife. There's not much to complain about. The only things I wish were different are, of course, the size, which I've already mentioned, and the bead blasted blade. So let me grab a couple of other knives that will serve as comparisons. Let's start with the Para 2. I mean, this is a knife that everyone's familiar with. This is the size of knife I prefer. So, again, Civivi, if you do an extra large version of this that comes to like 8.5 inches or so, that would be so ideal. Of course, the other thing is everyone knows what a Para 2 is. They're familiar with that size. Another knife that's a little on the smaller side but still works for people with larger hands is the Canadian Knife Company Sleeper. I want to throw that in. I almost did a comparison between these two, but I talked my way out of it. But nonetheless, that might be a good option for you. Similar price, similar size. A bigger knife again, but I think most people are familiar with this. This is the Real Steel H6. Great budget knife. Just mostly throwing it in there as a size comparison. I don't really have much else that I think works as a good comparison for this, so we're going to cut it off there. That I think is enough to give you, what's out there. This is a pretty tough knife to compare to, though, because it really does, if I had a bunch of Civivis here, most of them would not be as good as this. This really does take the Civivi game up a notch or two. All right. Overall, I mean, if you've been watching, you know I like this knife. I really, really do. And for me to like this as much as I do, given its smaller size, that should tell you something right there. Because normally a knife of 7 5/8 inches is just a hard pass for me. Even if I do pick one up, I'm kind of like, well, this has all the problems of typical small knives, and so it's not that great. But this is great, and I love it. I carry it. I enjoy it, even though it's a little smaller than I generally prefer. So that I think says all I need to say. The materials are great. It's comfortable in hand. It's a great design from Laconico. There's so many things to love about this knife, and if you haven't got one of these and you're a Civivi guy, if you like these smaller size EDC knives and you haven't got this, you're missing out. This is truly an excellent, excellent option. Thanks a lot for watching. Don't forget to check those channel sponsors. Go ahead and go over to White Mountain Knives. Use my discount code SHARPSTUFF. Blade Ops, DLT Trading, all of these guys help the channel out a lot. And when you guys use those links, that's very, very much appreciated. We will talk to you soon.